Hi everyone and welcome to a new video on the CBI channel. In this tutorial series we're deploying a Django and React application on Render. This is not the first video in this series, we've already done two before in which we've talked about the architecture of the deployment and also changed our Django backend code so that it is actually ready to be deployed on Render. In this video we're going to continue and we're going to be pushing our Django backend code to a GitHub repository using Git. Now, to do that, we're going to be following 5 main steps. I'm going to start by giving you a list of the things that we need to complete in this video. Then we're going to be initializing Git inside of our project and creating a GitHub repository. Then we can push our code to GitHub using Git, and I can also show you how we can handle updates to the code. And once that is done, we are ready to deploy the backend on the Render platform. And if we take a look at the architecture image, you can see that we're now in the place of the red box, where we're going to go from our local project and use Git to push our project to a GitHub repository. And how that is going to work is that we are going to create a Git repository in our project, which tracks the things that we have updated and stores them in there. And then we're going to use Git to push it to GitHub so that we have an online location where all of this is stored. So for this video, we need two different things. The first thing that you will need is a package installed on your computer called Git. And Git is a free and open source control system, which basically does version control of your projects. And you can use this for various different things, from data engineering to web development to whatever you would like. Now, downloading this is free and it's very easy. You can just go on the site and download it for Windows, and then you are completely fine. So please make sure that you have that on your computer. The next thing that you will need is a GitHub account, and GitHub provides the possibility to store your code in online repositories and even collaborate together on pieces of code. Now, same thing here. As for Git, getting a GitHub account is completely free and it is very easy to sign up. You can just go to github.com and sign up for GitHub. So please also make sure that you have an account on GitHub. And I'll put both of those links in the description. So let's initialize Git inside of our project. Now, what I explained already in the previous video is that we're going to deploy our backend and our frontend separately. And we're also going to create a separate Git and GitHub repository for both the backend code and the frontend code, so that it's a bit easier to deploy it. So what I now want to do is create a new Git repository inside of our backend. So I'm opening a new terminal on the top, and in there we cd into our backend so that we know that we create our Git repository in the right location. And then we can initialize our Git repository with a few very easy commands. The first thing that we do is say git config, because we're going to configure Git a little bit more. And then I do -- global, and then I say that user.name is going to be equal to my name. And in this case, I'm going to give it the name of CBI Analytics. Next, we can also configure our email. So we can do git config and then say -- global, and then that user.email is going to be equal to the email address. And in this case, I'll just do a fake email address such as cbi@email.com, but you can put in your own email address here, of course. Now, to initialize an empty Git repository, we can do git init, and this will initialize an empty Git repository. And you can also see that right here, that it has enabled it inside of our backend folder. And in your project, you will notice two immediate changes. In our backend folder, all of the files right here are highlighted in green. And after the file names, we see a U. And what this means is that all of these files are untracked, because Git is not yet aware that these files exist inside of our empty Git repository. So every time you create a new file, it will show up with the letter U. If we modify one of the files that was tracked before, this will turn to orange and have the letter M, and it lets it know that one of the files has been modified. So Git is constantly going to track which files are new and which are updated, so it knows what updates it needs to make in the repository. Now you might wonder, where is Git actually tracking this? Because I don't see anything inside of my project. If you go to the folder location of your project, and in this case we also go to the backend, you can see that we have a hidden folder called .git. And inside of this folder, Git is tracking all of the things that happen inside of our project. So in this folder right here, it keeps track of all of the files that we have and when they were last modified or when added. Now, we do need to tell Git that we want to add all of these new files to our Git repository, because otherwise it doesn't know what it needs to transport from this folder to GitHub. Now, to tell Git that this is there, we can do git add and then do a dot, which means that we're going to add everything. And now you can see that we have another letter next to the file, which is an A of index added, because now we have added that to the index. Now we also need to do another command to make sure that everything goes well, and that is git commit. And after that, I'm doing a dash and then am, because that allows us to add a message to the files that we have added to our project. So let's say that I've added a new file called users. I can say I have added a users file. But in this case, I'm just going to say that this commit is my initial commit, which just brings all of the files inside of my Git repository. And when I click on enter, you can see that now all of these files that we added to Git have now actually been committed. And my files no longer show up as untracked or as index added, but they're now all added to this Git folder, and it knows that everything inside of my backend folder is now successfully processed. So now that we've told Git which files of our project need to be added to that Git repository, we need to send the same files with Git to GitHub. So I've just logged into my GitHub repository, and to make sure that we can store all of the files from our local project on GitHub, we need to add a repository. And the repository is kind of the library of the project. So on the top left, I can add on new. And now it's going to ask me a few questions on creating the repository. Now I'm going to be calling this the render deploy tutorial Django code, because yeah, that's what it is for me. And as a description, I'm going to say this repository contains the Django code of the render deploy tutorial. But you can of course name this whatever you would like. Now you also have an option to make your repository public or private. Now if it is public, then everyone on the internet can see your code. So also if you have sensitive information in there, everyone can see it. So only tick this if this is applied to you. Private means that only you can see and commit to this repository, which is a much safer option. So if you do client work or you try to develop something that you want to keep as a secret, always click on the private one. And also there are a few other options such as a README file or add a gitignore file. We actually already have that, but this is all not applying to us. So I'm just going to click on create repository. So now our repository is live, and it provides us with a few options to put our local code on GitHub using Git. So it has two options. The first thing is create a new repository on the command line, but this actually does some of the steps we've already done, because it is initializing a Git repository, it adds some files, it commits something, but yeah, that's something we just did. We can also pick the second option, which is push an existing repository from the command line. And that's actually the option for us, because we've already created our Git repository and we now want to push that to this place. So all we need to do is copy over this command on the bottom, go back to our code and just paste in the lines over there. And that is going to take all of the files that we've listed in our Git repository and make sure that it's available on GitHub. And now when we go back to our Git repository and we refresh the page, you will see that the code of our backend is completely available here with the message that we put here of initial commit. Now, the last thing what I also want to show you is how you can process updates, because it can be that when we deploy this, we need to change the code or there are new requirements, so our code is completely changed. So to do that, you can go back to your Visual Studio Code and to your project. And let's say that we are going to change something slightly in our models.py file. It can even be something such as I add a few spaces and I do this. And when I now save this, you will see that the models.py file shows up in orange because we have modified this file. Now to process this change to Git and to GitHub, we first need to add it to our Git repository and then push it to GitHub. Now to add it to our Git repository, we can follow the same steps as before. So we can do git add and then just a dot to add everything that we've just added. Then we can do git commit and then do -am to give it a message. So for example, I can say changed the models.py file. And now you will see that this modified thing is gone. And now to push it from the Git repository to GitHub, we simply do git push. And because we connected Git to GitHub, it already knows where we need to push it to. And now when we go to GitHub and I refresh this page, you will notice that in the My Calendar folder, we have something called change the models.py file. And when I click on this, it will actually also show what has been changed and where to find that. So that also makes it quite easy to track the changes across time. And that is actually all for this video. In this video, I showed you how we can push our local code to GitHub using Git. In the next video, we're going to continue and we're actually going to deploy our Django backend code on render. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.